Welcome Bronco Nation to my weekly video where I go over the top 25 matchups and how Boise State fans should root in each one of them. This is of course going to be the first full weekend of college football. All conferences are in play with the return of the Pac-12 and the MAC. Of course, the MAC is going to be starting off their season on Wednesday, and the Pac-12 is going to have their games starting throughout the week as well. So a couple of top 25 matchups for the Pac-12, and then of course a lot of top 25 matchups to go over. Of course, the biggest top 25 matchup as far as Boise State fans are concerned, and really one of the bigger ones this weekend, is going to be number 9 BYU versus Boise State. That's going to be 7:45 p.m. Mountain Time on FS1. I think we all know how Boise State fans should be rooting that one, so I won't go into that in depth. Expect me to go more into depth on that in my game preview when I present my 3 keys to the game, which will be coming out probably on Wednesday. But obviously, a lot of big matchups this week. So let's get into them then. So first off, all times are going to be in Mountain Time. And I'm going to try and remember this time to read off the time the game starts and also what network it's going to be on. Before we start, just remember to going over the 3 basic rules as far as rooting top 25 goes for Boise State fans. Number 1 rule is going to be root against the unbeatens. Obviously, the few unbeatens there are out there, the more Boise State stands out as long as it does have any losses on their record. Second is going to be root against the ranked teams. That's one's pretty obvious. And the third, root against the American Athletic Conference or ranked American Athletic Conference always. That's going to be the main rival of the Mountain West when going for that group of 5 spot. So let's get into it. We're going to go over some of these games that fit within the rule, and then there's going to be a couple exceptions, and we'll point those out. So first game other than Boise State, it's going to be 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time on ESPN, and it's going to be number 11 Miami versus NC State. We're going to want NC State to win this one. NC State taking out Miami. Miami's going to fall a lot. Going to fall significantly after already suffering a loss to Clemson without any really quality wins on their schedule. NC State threatens to possibly break into the top 25, but I don't think they'll jump over Boise State. And a good loss at 11 with Boise State being 21 help chip away at that advantage that Miami has right now, help Boise State to rise in the rankings. If not this week, maybe next week if Miami continues to struggle. Next matchup is going to be Liberty versus Virginia Tech. This is a tough one for me. I'm also a Liberty fan. But this one, we're actually going to want Liberty to lose. They are an unbeaten team, and they're a ranked team, and they're just behind Boise State at number 25. So only 4 slots back there at number 25. So Virginia Tech, we're going to want Virginia Tech to win this one. It's going to be 10 a.m. Mountain Time on the ACC network. Virginia Tech, if they beat Liberty, probably will jump in the rankings, but again, they'll stay behind Boise State. We can always root against them next week. Michigan versus Indiana, 10 a.m. Mountain Time on FS1. Number 23 Michigan versus number 13 Indiana. We're going to want in this one, we're going to want Michigan to beat Indiana. Now, this one you might think, Michigan right behind Indiana. If they beat Indiana, they're going to jump Boise State. That's true. That's definitely true, and that's probably very likely. But Indiana will be knocked back, which might end up negating that. I mean, Indiana will probably fall behind Boise State if they lost, and Michigan might jump ahead. So the end result will be null, and it would be an undefeated team getting knocked off. And Michigan is likely to lose at least one more game throughout the season, either to Wisconsin, Ohio State later on the season. Actually, I don't remember if they do play Wisconsin. I know that the schedule's kind of whack this year. So let's see. Yeah, they do. They have a game against Wisconsin. So they have a game against Wisconsin and Ohio State still on the schedule. Likely going to lose at least one of those, just the way it's kind of been for Michigan over the last couple of years here, and indeed over the last 5 years. So we're going to want Michigan to win this one. Next game, SMU versus Temple. Big opportunity here for Boise State fans. If Temple can knock off SMU, not only is that an AAC team, ranked AAC team ahead of Boise State, knock them back in the rankings, but it also is one of the 4 group of 5 teams right now that is challenging Boise State for that group of 5 spot for the New Year's Six. Temple is not favored in this one. They're actually underdogs by 17.5 points, as would be expected, being 1-3, going up against 6-1 SMU. But a win by Temple would do 2 things. First off, it would knock off SMU, destroy their hopes of beating out Boise State for that group of 5 spot. Secondly, it would really chip away at one of those quality wins that Cincinnati is supposed to have, mostly beating teams within its own conference. It would really chip away at that and help Boise State in their quest to be considered an equal there, especially if they win against BYU. Arizona State versus USC, Sun Devils versus Trojans. Both haven't played yet, both undefeated in that nature, and at USC at number 20. We don't want USC to lose this one. I don't think the Sun Devils are going to threaten to jump to the rankings this week, especially USC being a borderline top 25 team there, ranking number 20, right ahead of Boise State. Arizona State knock off USC would be great. USC is favored by 10.5. I think they're a little overranked as usual. USC is always kind of ranked up there, whether they deserve it or not. So Arizona State win would be good for Boise State, knock off opponent in front of them, and I think there's a good likelihood of that happening. West Virginia versus Texas. Texas, of course, had that big win against Oklahoma State last week in overtime. Big win for Texas. But we don't want West Virginia to win this one. I don't think West Virginia is going to challenge to jump in the top 25. It would knock off Texas, and it would make Oklahoma State look worse, which, depending on whether they win or lose this matchup, might cause them to fall further in the rankings, enabling Boise State to jump them at some point this season. Umass versus Marshall. Marshall's favored by 45 points. It would take a near miracle for Umass to win this game. In fact, there's just almost zero chance, but Marshall, one of those group of 5 teams that's undefeated, ranked number 16 and ahead of Boise State. All of those not good for Boise. If Marshall was originally on the Boise State schedule pre-COVID, so really one of those terrible things that come out of the COVID situation is now not only did Boise State get a chance to beat a quality opponent, but they also now have that quality opponent challenging them for the group of 5 slot, and that could be huge coming up. If Marshall and Boise State end up undefeated at the end of the season, that canceled game could end up looming really big for Boise State. So Marshall, we're going to want UMass to win. UMass only got 3 games scheduled after jumping on the bandwagon late. I don't think they're going to get, they already have a loss. Don't think they're going to get a win here. Florida versus Georgia. This one's kind of a toss-up. Both of them have a loss, number 8 versus number 5. Doesn't really affect Boise State right now. Probably going to want to root for Georgia in this one. Florida State's a little bit further back, so a loss would hurt them more than Georgia would, knocking them further back, knocking them into ability of getting knocked off later on. Also, Florida's just ahead of BYU at number 9, so them losing ahead of BYU, even if Boise State beating BYU, it's knocking out the ground underneath as the team's falling back. So I think that could help BYU maybe not fall as far, which would be good for Boise, because we want to get ahead of BYU, but we also want them to stay ranked because we want to have that quality win. We don't want them to fall out of the rankings because then it doesn't look like it's as good. So I'm going to want Georgia to beat Florida in this one, and it's going to be a close game. Line is 3.5. Houston versus Cincinnati, the biggest, besides the Boise State game, the biggest non-Boise State game for Boise State fans. I'm going to talk about this one again in my 3 keys to the game video right at the end there. But Houston versus Cincinnati. Cincinnati favored by just under 14 points, 13.5. I think that they are very vulnerable in this one. Of course, Cincinnati had the big win last week against Memphis, blew them out. But a Houston win against Cincinnati, Houston at 2-2 is in no danger of threatening to jump into the rankings, even with a big win. And if Houston could beat Cincinnati, I think Boise State would control their own destiny, especially with a win over BYU, control their own destiny as we come into the New Year's Six conversation here. Purdue versus Wisconsin, both teams undefeated. Wisconsin actually 2-0. This one's another one of those tricky ones. Wisconsin is favored 8.5 in this one. We're probably going to want Wisconsin actually to win this one because Purdue at number 2 at 2-0 and would go to 3-0 with a win over Wisconsin. Probably jump Boise State. Again, I think Wisconsin's probably going to lose another game, probably to Ohio State later in the season. So this is going to be a big one if Wisconsin can beat Purdue here, which I think they can, knock off a challenger to jumping Boise State. And I misspoke there. Actually, Wisconsin's not scheduled to play Ohio State, but there are some potential losses on here. Minnesota, Iowa, Indiana University, all of those, Michigan, all those potential losses. I think Wisconsin will get their loss sooner or later, and it would be better for Wisconsin to win and not let Purdue jump over the Boise State Broncos here. Okay, so almost done. Kansas versus Oklahoma, obvious one here. Be great for Kansas to knock off Oklahoma. Don't think that's going to happen, but if they could hold the game tight, make Oklahoma challenge a little bit with that matchup, it would hurt them a little bit in the rankings and might let Boise State jump over them even without a loss. Okay, Oklahoma State versus Kansas State. Kansas State, I think Kansas State's going to win this one. I think that they're in a really good position. Oklahoma is favored by 12.5 points. Kansas State in a really good position to win this one, I think, though. Oklahoma State reeling after that loss to Texas. Kansas State, I think, has, again, as I said, has a good chance to win this one. Good for Boise State. I don't think Kansas State might get ranked, but I don't think they would jump Boise, and I think Oklahoma State might fall. I don't know if they'd fall out of the rankings, depending on how bad the loss was, if it did happen, but I think they would fall behind Boise. Texas A&M versus South Carolina. This is a close one. South Carolina's been one of those surprising teams. You know, the 2-3 record, but they're better than that 2-3 record. They've played a lot of tight games. They've looked good in a lot of them, and I think they have a chance here. Texas A&M only favored by 9.5 points, even though Texas A&M is ranked 7th. South Carolina with a win wouldn't jump in the rankings, and it would hurt Texas A&M. It wouldn't fall behind Boise necessarily, but it would hurt them in the rankings. So, Baylor versus Iowa State. Baylor 1-3. Iowa State number 17, 4-2. And I just realized I've forgotten to be saying the times and what channel they're on for most of these. That's okay. You can look them up yourselves later. It's all right there on the ESPN page. Baylor versus Iowa State. It's always been one of those close ones. Baylor and Iowa State have played a lot of close matchup and rivalry. I wouldn't call it a rivalry necessarily, but they have played a lot of close matchups over the years. Be good for Baylor to get a win here. I don't know if they're going to, but Baylor manages to pull out a surprise win here and there, and they have had some very challenging offensive matchups throughout the Big 12 since in the past few years. Clemson versus Notre Dame. Both teams undefeated. Both teams 1-4. Notre Dame, I think we're going to want to root for Clemson in this one because Notre Dame, if they lose to, other way around, we're going to want we're going to root for Notre Dame in this one. Notre Dame, if they beat Clemson, has a good chance of going undefeated the rest of the season. This one doesn't necessarily impact Boise State as much, but one that as many teams have lost as possible. So we're going to want to root for Notre Dame. Clemson still has to play Virginia Tech at the end of the season. I think that's going to be could be a surprising matchup. Could give Virginia Tech have a chance in that one, at least better than the opponents Notre Dame has left. I think that we're going to root for Clemson. Sorry, root for Clemson. I'm getting all mixed up on this last one. Coming down the home stretch. Sorry. We're going to root for Clemson this one because I think Clemson has a good chance of getting beat later in the year. So we're going to root for Clemson in this matchup against Notre Dame. Rutgers versus Ohio State. Easy one. Great for Rutgers to get the win over Ohio State here. They would jump in the rankings, but, always going to root against the Buckeyes if we can because a few times the Buckeyes are going to take a loss. So any time to get that L on the season is going to be a good opportunity. So root for Rutgers in this one. Stanford versus Oregon, undefeated teams coming in. Root for Stanford in this one against Oregon. Oregon being ranked. I think Stanford would jump into the rankings, but better to root against the ranked team right now. Always a chance that Stanford might not be considered top 25 worthy quite yet, and Oregon's head of Boise State here, so I'm going to root for Stanford in this matchup. South Alabama versus Coastal Carolina, final one coming down the stretch. Coastal Carolina struggled a little bit last week, but they did end up pulling out the win. But it'd be great if South Alabama could pull off a win here, beat one of those group of 5 teams that's challenging for that spot. So South Alabama versus Coastal Carolina, going to be rooting for South Alabama. That about wraps everything up here. Of course, big game coming up Friday, as I said, Boise State versus BYU, the highest ranked team to ever come to the Blue. So we want to make sure we hold on to that blue turf advantage, beat BYU at home, big rivalry, love that game. But looking for my my 3 keys to the game preview video to come out around Wednesday. All right, Bronco Nation, go Big Blue.